What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Eagles Centric, and we have a whole lot to get into today, as we always do. The offseason is going to be very intriguing, full of hirings and firings, and the offensive staff, the coaching staff, honestly, and all has been shaken up. Before we even got a chance to see what the roster was going to look like after the draft in the offseason, the coaching staff has been shaken up major. Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman is really shaking up things in the coaching staff, right? We have coaches contemplating retirement. We have offensive linemen contemplating retirement. We have a whole lot to jump into here on Eagles Centric. And, you know, with a lot of people coming in and out of the building, there's not a lot of great news. A lot of no-name hires, a lot of people that, you probably wouldn't know off the first soon as you hear their names. But we're gonna jump right into it and help you guys understand who some of these coaches are, who some of the offensive staff are, and some of the staff period that the Birds are bringing in. We have a lot to get into here on Eagles Centric, so let's stop yapping and get right into it. Eagles Centric.
Eagles fans everywhere, this is for you.
He's at the 20.
They should stop this one.
What you got? Domination! Snot bubbles!
He throws. Complete. Touchdown. They've got him again. They've got him again. Sack.
Crumpler, what a throw, what a hit, what a catch.
Defense is just way too much for the count.
It's caught by Alshon Jeffrey for a touchdown. Pushes. Touchdown. Jalen Hunt. Touchdown. A.J. Brown. A run. He's going to score.
It's a touchdown by Nick Foles.
The train is in the end zone. Touchdown.
Torrey Smith
In for the touchdown is Jeffrey. In. Touchdown. Jalen Hunt.
Roman numeral 7 days, drop it like it's hot. If this world was mine, I take it, dreams and make them multiply. If this world was mine, I take your enemies in front of God. Introduce them to that light, hit them strictly with the fire. Hey, Roman numeral 7 days.
Around this time last season, the Birds were gearing up to walk into the Superdome and set the roof on fire. Put their foot in Mahomes' ass and walked out of Super Bowl 59, the champions, like no other. The offensive line was so dominant, and Mekhi Becton pulling off of that line, running at you full speed, big guy, all that power, running at you full speed. I don't care who you are, you're going to get the hell out of the way. And Saquon Barkley right behind him. It was just a great rushing attack. It was a great offensive line, a great team all together. And that dominant the dominant offensive line had, some tweaks, right? Mekhi Becton left, and we knew there was going to be, maybe some changes. Tyler Steen was going to be inserted in for Mekhi Becton to let him go off to LA, get a big contract, and there were going to be some changes. We also knew there were going to be some changes to the coaching staff. We thought maybe some coaches might get poached, and one did in particular, Kellen Moore. Now, what we didn't account for was the Birds to fall from the top 5 rushing attack in the NFL to like the 23rd best, to the offense ranking in top 10s in almost every category the year before, to ranking in bottom of the barrel rankings for the for the weeks on, for the rest of the season. I'm sorry. I had a brain fart there once again. But we never thought that the rushing attack would go from top 5 to top 25. We didn't think that even the passing attack would go from, it was in the 20s walking into this season, but watching it looked much worse than it did the year before. And we knew the passing game was something that probably Jalen was going to have to, fix a little bit. But the balance with the rushing attack always makes our passing attack, it always makes it work. It always makes it dominant. It helps, because if you can run the ball, teams can't pin their ears back on your quarterback. Now they're confused. They don't know. You can mix it up, play action boots. You can do all kinds of things if the run game is working. And since the run game worked so well for the Birds last year, was the reason of why the Eagles were as successful as they were. Because, like I just said, if you can get the rushing attack to go, teams are now on their heels, and they don't know how to call plays against you. And you, as the offense, know where you're going and what direction that you're trying to take the defense. They don't, so you already have that advantage. And if you add more advantages, you become a dominant offense. And that is not what the Birds were this year. Underneath Kevin Patullo, new offensive coordinator, the Birds looked horrible. And as I've just said, the rushing attack went from top 5 to top 25. It was bad. The offensive line was hurt, which was out of anyone's control. That's a natural thing that no one can control. So that was a part of one of the reasons why the Birds season just didn't go well, why the rushing attack didn't look as competent, why a lot of things didn't look good. And it was also one of the reasons why Jeff Stoutland has departed from the Birds, because the rushing attack that he inserted, the rushing attack that he's well known for putting together, the rushing attack that he knows how to work and coach, was tampered with this season by Nick Sirianni and Kevin Patullo. And that is going to be another thing that the Birds will have to deal with this year. Now, we did bring in Chris Cupper today as our new offensive lineman coach. So hopefully the health for the Birds offensive line gets back to where it needs to be. And this new offensive lineman coach can bring in something good for this Bird team. Now, I also talked about this in a couple of episodes before. Now, this new Chris Cupper guy, who's going to be the new Birds offensive lineman coach, did work with Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota, and he also worked underneath Vic Fangio for 3 seasons in Denver, which is huge. Now, back to the Kevin O'Connell thing, I feel like that's very significant. I feel like that's very important to think about, because I said a couple of episodes ago, I wouldn't mind going to get Kevin O'Connell as OC. Of course, we knew that was a dream. That was something that we were just spitballing. We knew that probably wouldn't have been able to happen. He's a head coach for another team that's just so far from being able to be something reality. But that was just one of the things that I was spitballing about. Hey, if we had if I had a chance to pick my offensive coordinator, just pick him and he's our offensive coordinator, I would probably go with Kevin O'Connell, because I love what he can do with these quarterbacks. He's nicknamed the quarterback whisperer for a reason. Right underneath Dan Campbell in wins in the NFC, has a great resume. Yeah, so some of the guys off of his tree has now entered Philadelphia, and that guy is Chris Cupper, who also worked with Sean Mannion, right? And this is all, Sean Mannion made this call. Sean Mannion reportedly told Howie who he wanted, who he needed, and that's who he brought in. He's bringing in these guys from the Packers staff, like Ryan Mahaffey, who has a huge background in coaching, and he's bringing in this guy now, Chris Cupper, from the Vikings, who has a pretty versatile background in coaching also. Now, when you look at Josh Grizzard, who's an offensive coordinator for the Bucs last year, didn't do as good as in play calling, but he has that experience in play calling, something that Sean Mannion doesn't. And with Ryan Mahaffey there and Josh Grizzard there, and now we have Chris Cupper, that team of coaches, will be able to help Sean Mannion in where he lacks, right, on game day, especially Josh Grizzard. Mainly Josh Grizzard, because he has the play calling experience, and play calling is an art, something that I need Sean Mannion to understand. So with all of the bad news that's been coming out of Philly, and I gotta say bad because it hasn't been, a lot of these changes that's been happening in Philadelphia hasn't been, promising. A lot of these changes haven't been, something that we know is a for sure turnaround, because these guys that we're bringing into Philly are, essentially no-name guys. But if you are optimistic about the future for the Birds, or you're pessimistic about it, then you're going to have two different point of views, obviously. But me, I'm kind of in the middle. I'm kind of conflicted about this. But when it comes to Sean Mannion, the offensive coordinator who the Birds went and got from the Green Bay Packers, who was a quarterback's coach, I am very excited about that. Looking at Jordan Love and what he could do with the Packers, his tenure with Jordan Love, man, if he could do just you know what? I'm not even going to say the bare minimum anymore. I need him to do exactly what he did with Jordan Love, also with Jalen Hurts. That'd be phenomenal. And if we can get that we can get that elevation from, running a little bit more to throwing in the middle of the field and getting the ball out a little bit quicker as far as just Jalen Hurts, the quarterback himself, we'll be back to that 2022 season. Now, there's been a lot of news coming out of the NovaCare facility. And as I said in the beginning of this video, with all of the bad reports and all these horrible reports, like Jeff Stoutland leaving the Eagles, mainly due to, according to what Jeff McClain said, Kevin Patullo, sorry-ass Kevin Patullo, and an incompetent head coach, Nick Sirianni, who went behind his back and, changed things in the run game without consulting Jeff Stoutland. And like any professional in the NFL, or any professional in any other work environment, he felt some type of way about that. And instead of, expressing his gripes to the public or keeping that beef or whatever that was in the locker room or in-house in the NovaCare facility, he decided to part ways. And that also led to, some other reports that said that wasn't the case, that really the players were some of the guys that came to Kevin Patullo and Nick Sirianni and asked for that change in the offense. Either way it goes, it still says that Jeff Stoutland was upset with Nick Sirianni, our head coach, the incompetent bum head coach that I always speak about. Yeah, him, that he was kind of upset with him, and the disagreement there is kind of what ultimately caused the departure. Now, this was shocking news. I'm still shocked. I still don't know where to go with this. Jeff Stoutland was, of course, our offensive line coach, the greatest offensive line coach in the NFL, if you ask me, but also our run game coordinator. And if he was incorporating some of the same things that he incorporated with Saquon Barkley in 2024 in the 2025 season, then I have I don't disagree with any of this at all. Any of his disagreements, with what Sirianni and Kevin Patullo ultimately decided to do, I would have been mad also. So that's what I'm saying. I agree with Jeff Stoutland. If he was telling Nick Sirianni and Kevin Patullo, you guys need to just call better plays, the run game and the run scheme that I'm designing works, I agree. Because the run game and the run scheme wasn't bad. It was the offensive lineman who was hurt, and it was bad play calling. Now, when you put all that together, yeah, we know what happened. The bird season is what happened. But on top of that bad news that we also got some good news. But we're going to stay in this bad news bubble right now because I want to get to the more positive stuff a little later. Landon Dickerson's future, according to Mike Garafolo, is up in the air. As Mike Garafolo reported yesterday, an offseason of significant change for the Eagles could include guard Landon Dickerson's uncertain future. Jeff McClain mentions here Dickerson's no certainty to return. I've heard some of the same, only 27 and 5 years into his career, but his body has been through a lot. To be determined, TBD. Now, that is huge. Another shocking report that came out of the NovaCare facility that I was like, okay, what is going on? After the Kevin Patullo departure, I kind of was like, let's stop firing the staff. And, after the Super Bowl is when you start getting rid of players move, contracts are, being negotiated, and all of that stuff starts to happen. That's when the offseason really, truly begins. These huge moves like Jeff Stoutland being gone now, and, you're bringing in new run game coordinators like Ryan Mahaffey, who we will talk about. These big moves that you're doing now are like, seemingly massive. Not even seemingly. Some of these moves are massive because, Christian Parker's out of the building now, DB coach, and you have to fill in a lot of these areas. Vic Fangio is on his way out next season. He was contemplating retirement this year, and if it wasn't for the Eagles staff and brass, reportedly, Vic was probably on his way out. And we got that report from Adam Schefter saying that there was going to be some big news to come out of last week's what was going to come last week, and we thought that it was Vic Fangio. The reports were saying that Vic Fangio was maybe going to retire. I didn't necessarily believe it at the time, or I was just thinking, because I didn't see any credible sources say it at the time until I did start seeing some credible sources say it at the time. And I was like, okay, now we're talking about something. But 2027 is going to be maybe a season, most likely a season without Vic Fangio, a guy who I honestly, in my opinion, thought would be here for the next, 3 to 5 years. The fact that he contemplated retirement this year, the fact that he's on the way out, is another shocking report that just caught me off guard. There's a lot of things that's been happening early in the offseason, which, the things that are happening early in the offseason are some of the stuff that us as fans ask for, not specifically, but are some of the things that we ask for. We ask for changes, we ask for the offense to be changed, and we ask for the offensive staff to be changed. So we asked for a lot of those changes. We didn't ask for Vic Fangio to go anywhere. We didn't need any of the offensive linemen to leave other than Tyler Steen. But yeah, I didn't see any of these coming. These were big reports, huge reports, and the future is looking very dull for a lot of these players. Now with Landon Dickerson, as far as he goes, I'm not surprised. He dealt with a lot of injuries, mainly lower body injuries in college. And then when he got to the NFL, it was a lot of injuries just everywhere. Back and, lower body still, those lower body injuries still, and all of that stuff in between. So I'm not surprised. The only surprising thing about this report was Landon Dickerson's age and the fact that we just almost 2 years ago gave him a contract. A 4-year contract, might I add, which will carry on until next season. He has another, season or two with the Birds. So a post-June first cut would probably be better suited for the Birds if they were to get rid of Landon Dickerson. But doing anything with Landon Dickerson now would cost the Birds a ton of cash, like $27 million up to like $35 million if you move too fast. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to jeopardize, the teams when it comes to that cap hit. Also looking at the NFL, who's going to be getting a larger amount of money this year when it comes to just that cap. So let's try to do as much as we can as far as saving that cap and save as much as we can with Landon Dickerson, which Howie is going to do. I don't have any doubt that Howie won't get that done. It's just, like I said, it's shocking because Landon Dickerson's 27 years old. He just signed a big contract last year. He was top guard in the NFL last year. And yeah, he had a horrible season this year. Yeah, he was facing a lot of injuries. And yeah, his ranking plummeted as far as, compared to his prior seasons. But this is another shocking report that came out of the NovaCare facility that I was just like, what is going on? Now, the draft is coming up soon. Super Bowl will be over very soon. Sunday, Super Bowl is, once the Super Bowl is over, then we can start talking about, these mock drafts will be a little bit more intriguing to look at. And these pro days are starting to come up. And with the draft being in April, right around the corner, we can start talking about these left guards, right guards, these tackles that Howie will probably be getting in the first and second round. I won't even be surprised to see Howie go and grab a guard or one of these guys to replace a guy like Cam Jurgens in the future, Landon Dickerson in the future, or maybe go and grab Lane Johnson's replacement in the future. I won't be surprised to see it. I won't be surprised to see that. And there's a lot of other picks, a lot of other pieces that the Birds need as far as the draft. And we're going to get into all of that this offseason. But, man, the Landon Dickerson news, like I said, I'm going to beat this drum. It was shocking. I'm still shocked. But like I said, there is some good news that comes out of that. when it's dealing with the offensive line, surrounding the offensive line, there's some good news to come out of that. And that is Lane Johnson, who everyone thought was going to retire. I said at the beginning of the offseason, if you go back and watch any of my videos, you can go back and watch. I said on my last show, I said, I don't think Lane Johnson is going to leave on that note. You know, injured. He didn't even get to play in the playoffs. He was just banged up all year. And yeah, we know Lane is a vet. He got, 2 rings now with the Eagles. If he did decide to retire, it would be, salute, wish him well. You done good for us. I wouldn't be as sad. I probably would be a little bit worried because that's a huge piece. But like I said in the beginning of the offseason, Lane isn't going to go out on that note. I thought the same about Jason Kelce, but Jason Kelce was kind of at the end of that physically. He was just like he talks about all the time. But Lane, although his health is kind of, every year he's dealing with what he's dealing with, Lane, I don't think, wants to leave on that. If we went to the NFC Championship, lost in the NFC Championship game, I think Lane would have been able to leave on a high note, on his high horse, whatever. He'd be able to leave right off in the sunset, and everything would have been fine, even if we would have won a Super Bowl. But the way that the season went, Lane is like, hell no, we got to run it back. And also, Brian Baldinger, spoke about Lane and him speaking about this new run game coordinator, offensive coordinator, Sean Mannion and Ryan Mahaffey. And Lane also said that he wants to give those guys a chance. Now, if Lane's coming in with that optimism, if Lane is coming in with that optimism, then I think I should also. And we haven't got a chance to see how Jalen feels about any of this yet, but it'll be interesting.
With him last night, that Lane right now is up in the air, and you were with him last night. You think he's going to play?
I think, but I tell you, I know where you're going, cuz just being with Lane last night, I think he's going to play.
Yeah.
I think he's going to play. But he also said something that kind of shocked me, that I'll give this guy a chance. Let's give whoever it is, I'm going to give him a chance. Which is pretty open-minded.
Yeah.
When you've been groomed by one guy.
Yeah.
Your whole career. And Lane was last time you saying, Baldy, man, go back and watch my rookie year tape. Like, I had real flaws. I didn't know what I was getting into. I played offensive line 2 years at Oklahoma.
Right.
I didn't, and, he says 4th pick of the draft and, how he struck gold.
Now, speaking of play calling and the offensive line and this and that, Landon Dickerson's future for the Birds is very blurry. Now, I'm a little scatterbrained here, so let's reel it in and let me tell you exactly what it is that we're talking about. Landon Dickerson, his future for the Birds is very blurry. Now, according to Mike Garafolo, Landon Dickerson is a to-be-determined player on this roster. When he said the other day, an offseason of significant change for the Eagles could include guard Landon Dickerson's uncertain future. Jeff McClain mentions here, Dickerson is no certainty to return. I've heard the same. Only 27 years old and 5 years into his career, but his body has been through a lot. TBD, to be determined. And that was shocking news in itself. After the Jeff McClain, after the Jeff Stoutland news, after the Christian Parker news, after, getting rid of Kevin Patullo, and all the speculation around A.J. Brown and this and that, the Landon Dickerson news by Mike Garafolo was the last report that I wanted to read. I read it and I was like, well, there goes our offensive line, right? Because he's one of the best guards on the line. And Landon Dickerson did say after the playoff loss at home to the 49ers that he didn't know what the future would look like as far as this injury. He didn't know how he would come back after this injury. He didn't even understand how he actually played this season. Jason Kelce also told you in the beginning of the season that Landon Dickerson was barely even able to move. Now, doing a lot of thinking about this, I was saying to myself, if he was barely able to move in the beginning of the season, why did he play? Why was he ever Why was he ever marked as healthy and were able to get put out there on the field? Did we really need Landon Dickerson that bad? I mean, Landon Dickerson was very bad this year. Cam Jurgens was very bad this year. And this also goes into why I know Howie will go in this first, maybe second round and get us an offensive lineman, a guard to be exact. But Howie will go into this draft, and early in the draft, I won't necessarily just guarantee the first round, but early in this draft, first or second round, Howie's going to get us a guard. Because even if Landon Dickerson does decide to come back, that was a scare. That report is scary. And to know that his health is that bad to the point where he is where he is contemplating retirement, now it's like, okay, do we really need him to even play now? Like, if the injury is that bad to where he's contemplating retirement, we don't know if he will actually be healthy enough to play NFL football. The guy does not need to be out there. If there's a question about his health, and I'm not just saying this because he's an Eagles player, I say this about any NFL player who puts their body on the line to entertain us as fans, birds or not. They don't need to be playing if their health is in danger. If you have injuries like this lingering into the offseason, from the season before all the way up into the next season, and it has gotten worse, I don't think that player needs to be playing. And if he's not going to play, in which after that report, I said, Landon Dickerson is going to retire. And it's sad because he's only 5 years into his career early. But if you go and do your research, and if you've been watching Landon Dickerson from college, from Florida State, all the way up until now, he has had lower body injuries all throughout his whole college career. He has had sporadic injuries when it came in the NFL. In college, it was literally ankle sprains, ACLs. It was all lower body. And once he got into the NFL, it got sporadic. So with this horrible injury that Landon is going through, I think that, Howie needs to be paying attention to, okay, what can we do to replace him? Of course, I don't have to tell Howie to do anything. Howie is a genius. This is why we've been to 3 Super Bowls in the last 4 to 5 years. The Birds are like, top of the class, top class when it comes to getting in players, signing players, getting those contracts, getting players out of here, and not allowing it to actually impact the team in a negative way down the line. Howie has done good when it comes to that.
But when I got to Philly, man, Philly welcomed me with open arms. That's home, man, and I love them. I love the support. I love the accountability. I love everything else that they do. Philly is Philly.
It was very close. Okay. It was very close. Eagles, before the Jalen Phillips, before all them, it was me. Yeah. It was me. Yeah. And I was really about to come, but there was one person that I had to play with that if he was gone, I did not want to be there. And that was Jalen Carter. Okay. They wanted to D-tackle. Yeah. And they wanted to trade me plus some picks. I don't really care about the picks, but yeah. I'm coming to play next to JC. You feel me? Like, crazy. Yeah, like, yeah. So sorry, Cowboys fans. It almost, it really almost happened.
Talk about beef.
Yeah. Yeah, nah, for real. That would have been, I feel like the trajectory would have changed. Yeah. That would have been
Now, you guys heard that from the horse's mouth yourself, right? And out of all the things that we've heard A.J. Brown say, now listen to me when I say this. This is what I'm talking about, what we've heard, not what we've read or what Jeffrey Lurie has heard. What we have heard from everything that we have heard out of A.J. Brown's mouth, he hasn't told us that he wants out of Philly. He hasn't said that not once. He told us what he wants Philly to do better. He's argued with coaches. He's argued with players. He said this about the team. He said that. The one thing we haven't heard him say, though, is, I want out. I don't want to be here anymore. And if that is the case, I don't want him here. And to be honest, even if he does want to be here, honestly, and that was genuine and that was honest, and he honestly feels that way, I'm getting to the point where I don't want him in Philly anymore. I'm getting to the point where, you show me too many signs that you don't want to be here. And, maybe when, there isn't a game next week and your legacy isn't on the line, then yeah, you sound jolly. You'll sit down and sound happy and cordial, and you won't not talk to the media when you speak about Philly being this great city and how they hold everyone accountable. You speak about accountability, but you aren't accountable. Your actions aren't showing that you are for accountability. When after a bad game, you don't talk to the media, whoop, this and that. It's always something with AJ Brown. Now, to be honest, I could care less about AJ saying that he wants to stay in Philly. This is what everyone says. What are they going to say? No, I hate that town. Get me out of there. I don't want to be there anymore. No, they're going to say all of the great things about Philly that makes it sound like I don't want to go anywhere. Now, we've heard reports about Mike Garafolo saying there aren't any trade talks just yet. But if you actually listen to that whole entire piece when Mike Garafolo was talking about it, he was basically saying that as of now, because of the Super Bowl was still, it was just yesterday. So the Super Bowl was still there. It was just a couple of days away. Teams weren't engaging in trade talks or negotiations with AJ Brown at the time because, the offseason is early in the offseason. Now, as the season goes on and as, the draft comes closer and he also said that the agent has had brief talks with the team. So that means that there is some communication going on there. And there is a possibility that we might move on from AJ. Even after AJ says this great thing, I love Philly, the accountability and, whatever, hoopla, whatever he's saying, and not to disregard what he's saying. I'm just saying whatever it is that he just said on that video, all of that means nothing once the offseason gets rolling for real. Because like I said, all of the players say this. I can go and show you 100 players from 100 different teams and 100 different scenarios, where they said this. No, I love it here. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. This is the greatest place in the world. When I first got here, they showered me with praise and whatever. Yeah, of course. But once it's time to go and you and the organization aren't seeing eye to eye, then, all of that is just hoopla, whoopla, like I just said. Now, the more important part about that video, which was a little bit more exciting to me, was the Micah Parsons part, telling us that he wanted to play next to Jalen Carter. And can you imagine? So, see, this is the things that I like to do as an Eagles fan because, sometimes you're spitballing, you're dreaming. Of course, it's not reality. You're just really thinking about it in a fun way. You're having fun with the thought about it, And the thought of mine was, as my message comes in, the thought of mine is, let's see if we can get AJ Brown for Max Crosby, right? And that was something that just had me going. It had me thinking. It had me going when Michael Parsons said that he wanted to play next to Jalen Carter. Because, of course, we weren't going to get Michael Parsons. But Max Crosby and reportedly the I'm sorry, I had a brain fart because of this message I just got. But Max Crosby and the organization aren't seeing eye to eye. And with AJ Brown not seeing eye to eye with the organization over here, they need a receiver. We could use another guy on the defensive line if we're not going to pay Jalen Phillips. It works for both parties. That is why the Michael Parsons part of this whole thing, of that whole video, was the most exciting part to me. Now, can you imagine that? Can you honestly imagine that? Max Crosby next to Jalen Carter, that defensive line would put us right back in that conversation. Not that Philly isn't in that conversation, but it's still a to-be-determined situation with the new offensive coordinator, and we have to see what the offense looks like going into the season. But if Howie makes that type of move, you trade AJ, you get all of that debacle out of there, you get that locker room cancerness out of there, and you bring in a guy like Max Crosby, who at this point, he's done it all. He just wants to win, right? Guys who just want to win come to Philly because we're winners. We're going to get you at least to the divisional championship game, the conference championship game, and we'll see where we go from there. But teams like the Raiders, players like Max Crosby need these type of trades. They're looking for these type of trades, right? And I don't know if the Raiders are willing to get rid of Max Crosby. I've heard some things about the Raiders and how their front office actually feels about Max Crosby. And, they say that, they're willing to get rid of him. They don't want to, but I've heard that they're willing to, make that move. And if that is the case, and if that's true, Max Crosby for the Birds would be very exciting. Now, I went from Micah to Max Crosby because Micah, speaking about how he wanted to play next to Jalen and that they wanted Jalen Carter, which is why Howie didn't make that move. Him speaking about that is what made me go to thinking like, yeah, Micah Parsons and Jalen would be awesome, of course, but that didn't happen. But I start thinking about a lot of other great edge rushers, defensive linemen who are on the market or just, big names. Because if that's the case, if we don't get a guy like Micah Parsons and we can't get Max Crosby, you keep Jalen Phillips and you go with that because Jalen Phillips is a star. But just going through all of the names, I said, well, Max Crosby isn't, seeing eye to eye with the Las Vegas Raiders front office. So that wouldn't be a far stretch. A.J. Brown for Max Crosby, how we would have to work through the numbers and those two teams would have to negotiate the contracts or whatever. But for us to ultimately get a guy like Max Crosby would be insane. Now, this isn't a Max Crosby video or trade rumor video. It's just something that I thought I thought about and I wanted to share with you guys. Now, you guys let me know in the comments how you feel down below. Do you trust AJ Brown's word here? Are you listening to it and you're saying, yeah, okay, AJ, I'm with you now. Like you've confirmed what I was thinking. You reassured me, all of that, whatever. Or, me, I'm a kind of an antiquated guy. So like, I'm pretty old school. So, once you go to talking and crying about things, there's not too many more times where I just want to say, get the guy up out of here. And AJ Brown did that all year, last year, the year before. And you kind of get tired of it after a while, especially when the team is winning. And then, we've talked about this many of times, when a team as good as the Eagles are on that road and the tunnel vision is to keep these wins going. The second one guy gets out of the line and say, hey, what about me? What about my numbers? Everything just starts to shift because, okay, the group now hears that and say, well, let's try to get this guy his numbers. And sometimes that, getting him his numbers comes in spite of the team. It comes you putting the team at jeopardy now because we're forcing the ball to him and we need to do this and we need to do that, which is what Jalen did all year after A.J. Brown cried. And even after he had perfect games where, Devontae would have like 190 yards and he'd probably have 150 or something like that, he'd still cry. He'd still whine and pout and complain. So, with a player like that, like I said, if you don't want to be here, just leave, man. If you're going to have good games and still complain, and you're going to have bad games and still complain, it's like, we don't want neither. Honestly, we don't want to hear you complain at all, especially when the team as a whole is doing bad. You complaining about what you could do better or why they aren't helping you be better. It just sounds very selfish and, it gets old after a while. But anyway, that was a good thought, fun thought that I was, going around with in my head. I was just like, dang, that would be a very, very intriguing move if the Birds were to get rid of AJ for an explosive, powerful, great defensive end like Max Crosby. Now, some of you are probably thinking, let's not get rid of AJ Brown for a defensive player. Let's probably try to substitute that. Let's probably try to replace that because, yeah, the defensive line is going to be great, but then now we have a hole on the offense. Another conversation for another episode because I'm intrigued to see what Howie can do with the AJ Brown trade if he really is insisting on getting out of Philly. So, like I said, another episode. That's another conversation for another episode. Hopefully, we won't be jumping on here, breaking news one day that AJ is gone and we just traded him. I said hopefully, but if we do, we do. If we don't, we don't. I don't really care at this point anymore. AJ is kind of annoying, but yeah, man. You guys let me know how you feel about that down below. Now, after the Birds went and got a running game coordinator to replace Jeff Stoutland, we brought in former Packers. He was a quality control coach. He was an offensive lineman coach. He was a tight ends coach. He coached the wide receivers. He's coached almost every position on the offense, Ryan Mahaffey from the Packers is who the Eagles brought in. And as I've said before, the Eagles are bringing in a lot of these Packers guys. And you know, these are calls coming from Sean Mannion, who was a Packers quarterback coach with Jordan Love. This is another piece added on to the Birds that I am in agreement with. I'm in agreement with it. I couldn't find anyone else that was a good run game coordinator, and especially with a guy who has a background with all of these various, jobs. He's had various jobs. He's worked with the tight ends, the wide receivers, the offensive linemen. He's been a quality control coach. He's done it all. So when you have a guy that's coming with a background that broad, it brings in some beneficiary for some. It can be a benefit. For the Birds in a lot of ways, of course, because the tight ends, that 2 tight end set was probably something that Mahaffey brings in. And this will actually show us as fans who probably don't know exactly, the X's and the O's. This will probably show us exactly what Sean Mannion probably wants to do with the team moving forward. As the post-draft, we'll kind of know because of the guys that he picks up, right? Grant Calcaterra, tight end for the Eagles, wasn't that good of a blocker on the edge when it came to the running game. He performed in other areas, but when it comes to blocking, tight ends and blocking are synonymous. You have to be able to block, or that just brings your draft stock it just knocks you down, right? So Grant Calcaterra wasn't the best blocker, and that was something that the Birds needed. So with this Ryan Mahaffey hire, the 2 tight end set, it was something that the Birds will be able to take advantage of if that's the offense that they decide to run with Ryan Mahaffey. You guys, let me know how you feel about everything else down below. As always, I'll be right here hanging out, Eagles Centric, as always, right back on the next episode. This offseason is going to be very intriguing, as I've said throughout this entire episode. So, hey, stay tuned. I'm going to keep you guys locked in and updated with the Birds all offseason. We're back on Eagles Centric, and you know the routine. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching once again, and be blessed. Go Birds.
If this world was mine, I take your enemies in front of God. Introduce them to that life. If the city was a fire. Hey, Roman 7, babe, drop it like it's hot. If this world was mine, I take your jeans and make them multiply. If this world was mine, I take your enemies in front of God. Introduce them to that life. If the strictly with the fire.